You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast. Is Ka a wheel? Is Stephen King the greatest horror writer of all time? We're going to find that out today on our special episode of Systematic Geekology. We are the priests to the geeks. On a very, like I said, special episode of Stephen King, his cosmology, the origins of his writing, and everything else there. And I cannot possibly do this task alone. And in fact, this episode itself is kind of special because we will be splitting it into two separate parts. One where I will be with my co-host here, Kevin Schaeffer. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm great. How about you, Christian?
I'm okay, man. Ready to just take charge of this. Stephen King is one of my favorite authors. Love him. So I'm ready for this conversation. Then, in a twist on how we do things, TJ and I will be doing kind of in the same essence an episode, but together there as well. He wasn't able to come with us today, so we're going to do that at a later date. But for now, you're stuck with me, but you actually get to enjoy being around Kevin. So, Kevin, what have you been geeking out on recently?
Well, very in line with this episode and just like horror Halloween themed, I watched all of the Fall of the House of Usher, which I know you and I talked a lot about Mike Flanagan on a previous episode when I was talking about Midnight Club, and we kind of delved into a little bit of his universe. But it is a great Halloween watch. I highly recommend it. And I do think I think Midnight Mass and Midnight Club have the most like spiritual themes out of the whole shows in Mike Flanagan's canon. But even with a very like heavy pulp kind of series like this, very horror driven, it still has a lot to say about wealth and power and influence and family dynamics that I would love to go deeper into on another episode possibly.
Excellent. Yeah, I need to catch up on that. I have it tabbed up on screen already just when I do have the time.
Sure.
Because I'm very interested to see where he goes with Poe. As much as like Midnight Mass is it's very Stephen King-y. He's got pretty much Salem's Lot and Storm of the Century all in one there. Love that a lot. So I will be checking that out, definitely. But right now, I've been geeking out on Spider-Man 2, which just came out. And I am having the time of my life just swinging through New York City. Like, just good to be back in gear again after the first game and solving the mystery of the symbiote and the Kraven hunting everyone. I am probably like 75% done with the main story. Really enjoying it. My own main complaint is they kind of nerf Peter a little bit. It's not like the worst thing in the world, in favor of Miles a bit, but I like both characters a lot. So I don't know. Peter's my favorite character of all time. So it's hard for me to see him not be as active as normal. But other than that, excellent game. I'm having a ton of fun. Yeah. So that's it for that. We're going to be getting into our main topic of discussion. And as Kevin and I were talking about earlier, we had a bit of a miscommunication with scheduling and of how much he knew about the cosmology side of things as opposed to like some of other King's writing. So it's good that we're splitting this up anyways. So we're going to split it up in that sense of we're going to be talking more about Stephen King as a writer, how much we like him, his influences and stuff like that. So, Kevin, how did you get into Stephen King's works?
Yeah. So I did not grow up a huge horror fan. I am now. I got more into college, but my first intro to Stephen King was at age 14 when I watched Shawshank Redemption with my dad for the first time. So that was the first Stephen King adaptation I saw, even before Stand By Me. But that was a huge influence on me. I actually did a post recently because I just turned 30 and I was going through every year of my life and picking out a movie that influenced me. And that was easily number one for the year 1994. And so that was actually my first intro. And then subsequently, I liked a lot of his literary fiction first because after seeing Shawshank, I later read the novella anthology Different Seasons, which has the Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption story in there. It also has the story that Stand By Me is based on, and a couple lesser known works in there. So that was actually my intro. I really gravitated toward that kind of literary fiction where he's exploring characters who are, like runaway imprisoned, like in Shawshank, or just kind of outsiders and, friendships and mystery. All these themes were really intriguing to me. And then I kind of got into his horror later. The Shining was definitely the first big horror novel by him I read. Of course, a classic. And, and that's the thing. What's interesting is like my dad doesn't do a ton of horror, but he loves like the big Stephen King ones. So he loves Shining, and we watched that. And then we actually just went the other day at Playmakers Theater in Chapel Hill right now. They have a production of Misery going on. And that's one of his favorites. And so we went there. We loved it. It is an excellent, and it was actually written by William Goldman, who also wrote the screenplay for the famous movie with James Caan and Kathy Bates. And so that was a great time. And yeah, I think I just over time, I got really into all of his works. I mean, I have friends who are way bigger fans and have devoured all his material in the same way as like I've consumed so many comics and and DC and Star Wars and all this stuff. But he's just such a brilliant writer. On Writing remains one of the best books about writing ever written. Like, and that's one I go back to repeatedly. I think I read it the first time probably early college. I want to say somewhere around there, and then I continually go back to that one. It's an excellent memoir. And then I mean, I love it. I love and I want to do. I like for the movie adaptations. I really like It 1 and 2. And I find it funny that people criticize It 2 a lot and they say it's not as enjoying. I think that's just both films are one of the best Stephen King adaptations up there. And it, in some ways, is an improvement on the novel because as much as I love like the book there, it could use some editing. And I think the movies.
Less cocaine.
Yeah, less cocaine, less little, and I think the movies capture all the core elements of the story really well and bring it to life in a really entertaining and interesting way. And then, so just, I mean, I've read a lot by him over the years, and I really like looking at all the films that either he was involved with or that were adaptations of his works. I like seeing different directors' approaches to them. So, I mean, I think the best ones to adapt his works have been Rob Reiner, Frank Darabont, and Mike Flanagan. But there are so many, earlier this year, I watched The Dead Zone, which is a really good one with Christopher Walken. And I like some of those kind of earlier stuff, like Pet Cemetery. And then I watched Christine recently, which is a really fun one. That was one that based on a Stephen King book, and then John Carpenter adapted it. And that one is just hilarious because it's literally about an evil car that comes into this possession of this nerdy kid. It's another perfect Halloween watch. But I think what draws me most to Stephen King is, yes, he can provide these like killer concepts for different genres, but at the core, he always has really well drawn out characters and really layered storytelling. And I mean, sure, there are stories by him that aren't as sensational as others, but he knows how to tap into just human sensibilities and really make characters that resonate with a wide range of people. And I think that's why, at age, he's 75 or something, and he's still cranking out novels every year. Going. And I mean, he has never lost his touch. He just has that continued passion for storytelling. And the book On Writing really delves into him as a person and what got him into storytelling in the first place and what's carried him through over the years. So that's just a little bit about my background. But what was like your first introduction for you, whether it was a book or a movie?
Yeah, sure. Real quick before we do get there, when was your birthday again?
October 19th.
Okay. Well, you're one day behind me.
I think I saw that. Happy belated. Yes.
Happy belated to you as well. 33 going on 75 right here.
Okay. Yeah, right.
But and real quick, you did mention On Writing as well. That has been a tremendous source for me, for my own writing as well. Like, not everything in there is what I agree with, but that's okay because writers are different people. You don't have to. I don't have to be a mini Stephen King. He doesn't have to be anywhere near like me. Like, it's just how it is. But if you're looking into it, you're even thinking about writing just anything in general, like, look it up. Like, the man knows his stuff. Like, he's clearly been at this for a while. It's excellent stuff. Now, as for me, how I got into Stephen King's works, as I've mentioned before, when I was a kid, hated being scared, hated anything to do with that, anything that could make me feel unwell or terrified. I removed myself from the situation. Like, it was forever before I could see the Kali Ma scene in Indiana Jones because I didn't want to see someone's heart being ripped out,
Yeah.
And now that I'm adult, I can finally do that. But I believe it was my junior year of high school. and I was in my English teacher's room, and she is one of the best teachers I ever had. And the one before her, like my 10th and 11th grade English teachers, not to say the others were bad, but I really gravitated towards them more. And she introduced me to Stephen King, said, hey, like, you're starting to get some of these things, because part of the stuff we would do would be some creative writing pieces. And have you ever read anything by him? I said, no. So she said, I know you read really long books, so I don't feel bad about recommending The Stand to you.
Oh, wow.
And this is the unabridged version of The Stand, which is over 1,000 pages long. And I was reading that book and I was captivated, because I think I mentioned before, like, I'm a complete sucker for found footage movies. I'm also a complete and utter sucker for post-apocalyptic literature, film, what have you. Just like, I want to see, like, what does someone dream of a scenario if, you know, a virus came out and it killed like 90 whatever percent of the population, or you have a bunch of vampires take over, or zombies, or whatever. Like, what leads to this situation? How do people survive in that situation? And he provided that in spades. It's not a perfect book. I mean, I still rated it a 10 out of 10, but, you know, it's excellent. And just seeing him develop that mythos, and you get a bit of that. Have you read that at all, or watched the miniseries?
No, and I need to. Like, that's, there are big gaps in my that I would like want to get to. Like, I've read it. I've read Signing and some of the others, but The Stand is kind of is one of the big gaping holes in my Stephen King fandom.
That's more than fine, because we were also talking beforehand, and Kevin has actually read some of his newer stuff that I'm way behind on. So we'll get to that in a moment. So I read The Stand, and I just kept going with that. Just, you know, The Shining, Carrie, got to Salem's Lot, and like the dumbest mistake of my life was reading that at 2:00 in the morning as a thunderstorm was outside, and I am there like under the covers reading a book, knowing it's not real, but at the same time being completely and utterly terrified. I've yet to recapture that feeling again, except for like reading Uzumaki. Same thing. That's a manga, by the way, horror manga in the middle of the night while it's raining. Bad decisions. I'm dumb. I was a dumb kid. But then eventually, same teacher, Miss Mackle, gifted me her Dark Tower series, because it was about that time she was about to move away. So she knew I was really getting into more King, and like allowed me to read hers, and blown away by the mythos he was creating there. Gotten a bit more like how his world started connecting to each other. And I think that's one major reason why I do that in my own writing as well, because I like things to connect. And like, I have, like, if you're paying attention, like, there'll be a mention of something here that'll be said in another book. It's like, oh, that's from that world. Oh, that's that character said that, or they were there. You know, I love stuff like that, because like it's one of those things. If you're paying attention to his stuff, you're rewarded for it. And I love that as a writer, and I love that as a reader. And he pays off in spades. Like, it's not like he planned everything in advance. He's gone on record several times before as be like, sometimes I just sit there and write, and sometimes I outline things. And I'm an outliner. Like, I could never imagine just going and just whatever happens. But I've also never taken a massive amounts of cocaine at that point in my life, which he has been off of for a very long time. He's been clean for a very long time. But that's where I stand there.
It is fascinating, though, like how he can do, especially with like the volume of his work, and some of it's one thing to not outline, you know, a short story or a novella, but when you have these huge epics, and he says that he doesn't do extensive outlines and he'll just go kind of with the nugget of the idea, that amazes me. And I mean, I believe it. He can do it. That's why I think what you were saying about on writing is that, yeah, you're not going to agree with everything in there advice wise, but that's why it's really good to read different perspectives from different authors. But yeah, it's just fascinating when he says that, because I'm the same way. I have to have at least, you know, some semblance of where I'm going before I start crafting a story.
Okay. Yeah. So when it comes to his writing, do you have a favorite book that he's written? And do you know if it has any ties to his later cosmology stuff?
So it probably doesn't, because like I'm kind of like, I'd probably put Misery at the top for me, because like that one was, and especially having just seen the play, that one was really influential on me as a writer, because it not only did it inspire some ideas I've had since then, but also that really taps into I mean, he writes about writers a lot in the stories, but that one in particular, it captures this relationship between an author and toxic fandom so well, and it really highlights a horror that is very plausible in the real world. As much as I love his supernatural stuff, I think I really do like the real world horror that he's able to capture and really heighten those tensions. So I love Misery. And also, you were mentioning like the connected world building and the Easter eggs and stuff. I was able to point that out the other day when I saw the play with my dad and friend, and I told them at the very end that in the final scene after spoiler alert, Paul Sheldon survives, and he's doing a book tour at the end of the play, and the voice that introduces him is Dick Halloran. And I was like, do you know who that is? And I'm like, it's the guy from The Shining, because in the book he survives. And so that, like, I love just even like in something like that, there are those Easter eggs and connective tissue. But I love Misery. Like, it really is hard to pick one because
there's a lot to choose from.
There's a lot to choose from. I love The Shining, and then the novellas, like I think Different Seasons is my favorite collection by him, because that has some of his most iconic stories there that were then adapted into major movies that I really love. So those are kind of but I still have so far to go. There's so many more I want to read, and as far as movie adaptations, other than Shawshank and Stand By Me, I think it is probably my favorite adaptation there. And The Mist is a really good one too, both the short story and the movie. I think that's one of the more underrated. And that one, talk about like the movie differs from the book's ending.
Yes,
but the movie has one of the darkest endings I've ever seen. I don't really want to spoil for people who haven't seen it, but go see that one if you want a really just like unsettling feeling.
And that's actually one of the few times I can ever remember an author saying, "Hey, you did it better than me."
Yeah.
He's gone out and said that about the movie, which I do agree that just because I hate ambiguity with every fiber of my being when it comes to the end of a story. So, like, well, tell me something's happening. Tell me what happens versus his whole thing of, well, and then we left, and the movie ends a certain way.
Not in a happy end.
You probably shouldn't have children around if you really like them while watching that. If you don't, maybe you'll like the ending of the film. And
or even if you don't have kids around, like if you're just a parent, or like, I mean, I'm not a parent, but I'm an uncle. Like,
it's an impossible choice.
It just like messes with you so much because that idea puts you in there, and you're just like, oh my gosh, what would I do in that scenario? And it's really hard to say.
Yeah, I get it completely. But I mean, on his more literary stuff, all real solid. I love The Green Mile. I love The Shawshank Redemption, Stand By Me. Excellent stuff. There's a reason they've been adapted in the film beyond his horror stuff. Like, he's a very versatile writer in that sense. Can't go wrong with any of those. Now, I did say I kind of gave it away. My favorite is The Stand. So I talked about that for a bit, but I'll talk about others as well, because like we said, like there are plenty to choose from. And two others that just keep things simple. It is definitely one of my favorite books he's ever written. It's a masterpiece of what makes someone afraid. And then how do you fight against fear? Well, you can't do it alone. And if you try to do it alone, you're going to end up dead. I mean, you may end up dead even when you work together, but it's going to be a lot better odds than if you just went by yourself. And it's the whole thing of like, the power of a child's imagination versus what you lose as an adult. I think we can all look at that very spiritually. Like when we probably first time those of us came to faith early, like where was that kid who just got things, who just like sought after Jesus more than anything. And now I'm here, this grumpy old man. And sometimes it seems like Jesus is so far away because I'm not seeking after him the same way I used to. Like that, it is amazing. Just Pennywise is one of the best villains he's ever made. Horrendous, no redeeming qualities whatsoever. It's kind of like the Joker in that regard. Like I normally like more nuanced characters, but sometimes you just need someone when they're written really well to be absolute scum. And when they get their comeuppance, I cheer every time. So there's that. The Shining is, of course, amazing. Definitely, he was very upset with what Kubrick did, changing stuff there. But your mileage may vary. I enjoy the film and I enjoy the book, but both for different reasons.
It's funny too because I went back recently and saw an interview he did on Letterman back in like late '80s, and Letterman asked him about that signing in, like because I had heard so much, oh, he hated it so much and all that, and I think initially he did because it does change the ending significantly and it just has a different tone to it. But he was saying in that interview that he did admire a lot about the film. It's still he has issues with the storytelling decisions, but he respects that it's a different version than his own. So that was interesting to watch.
Yeah, I think it was a very personal book to him as well. While he was dealing with his addiction issues, like he saw Jack as someone who was struggling against fighting those things while wanting to be a family man because he was doing the exact same thing in his own life. And I think one of the things he said, I can't remember the exact quote, is like, in my book, Jack Torrance is, someone who becomes a madman. In Kubrick's, he's a madman from the very beginning and ends up as a madman. So I definitely feel like I understand why you would be upset with that. But like this film is still incredibly well made, incredibly acted. It's just different. So actually, that brings up a good question. We'll get to that in a second. Of like, when should you change a book or something like that when you're adapting a new film? But my final answer for book I like would be Salem's Lot, and I love vampires. I love when he was coming up with the story. He wanted the idea of what if Dracula were alive today, and he brought that up to his wife Tabitha, who's also a writer, and she said, "Well, he'd probably get run over by a car." And he put that away for a little bit, but then he actually started thinking about it, and we get that terrifying, even using the mythos of the vampires, they have to be invited in. Like, you can stay inside, but they're going to use everything in their power just to get you to let them inside. That is terrifying. Using people just to tear down the walls of what a town could be. You have the religious strife in the town. You have a crisis of faith for, oh, goodness gracious. What is his name? Father Callahan? Is that what it is? I'll look it up in a bit.
Yeah.
But that is tremendously well done. It is Father Callahan.
Yeah.
So,
and
go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying, like, there are so many, like, religious characters and themes he explores through his books. And, the Pet Cemetery is also one of the most, like, terrifying and, like, existential questions asked about parenthood and then, tying that into a spiritual element. They're all just, so, and like I said, I haven't read it, but I watched The Dead Zone earlier this year.
Okay.
And that was another one that, like, what is it like for a man to wake up after a 5-year coma and he's readjusting and then he learns he has this, supernatural power.
Yeah, that's one thing too. Religious fundamentalism has always been something he is, rightly so, very against. And it's, but one of the parts is that those characters sometimes could be a little one note.
Yeah.
And how they're portrayed, like, was it Mrs. Carmody or Carbody or whatever it is in The Mist? Like, she is kind of the definition of the stock. Religion is evil kind of person. And then, like, Carrie's mother sometimes can be a bit much. But then other times he'll have someone like Father Callahan, who actually appears in the Dark Tower series because he leaves the town of Salem's Lot after realizing that he's not the priest he should have been. And it's his kind of crisis of faith there. Like, he doesn't land anywhere where I would be happy, like, theologically, but at the end of the day, I see the struggle there and I really appreciate where the character goes from where he started. It's extremely well done. And I think for King himself, that's one of those things. His religion has kind of always been all over the place. Sometimes he leans a little closer to where God is, and other times he sees the way Christians are acting and he goes, I want nothing to do with that. In fact, his daughter is actually...
She's a minister, Unitarian minister, I believe.
Yes. I didn't know if she was married to a Unitarian minister.
I think she is.
Minister, or she is. Okay.
I think she is, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
They're pretty. Everyone in the family is writers in some way. Of course, Joe Hill is his son, and then but even his younger son too is a writer as well. And no, I believe his daughter she is the minister.
Okay.
She and her wife might both be. If I don't know, I have to look that up to confirm.
Okay. Don't I remember the Unitarian part. I couldn't remember who was who.
Yeah.
But yeah, I see his struggle, like, with his own faith. Like, where does he stand through all this stuff?
Yep.
And actually, for our bonus question, I'm going to ask. actually both of you, for our special Captivate and Patreon listeners, like, do you think Stephen King has hope in his life? And we'll see where that lands. So if that captivates you, maybe you should throw a little money our way.
Do it.
But we both brought up The Shining earlier. Like, how do you think, when is it appropriate for a director or a screenwriter to change something from an original a novel or a play or something like that so that they can fit it into a film?
That's a good question. I mean, I think there is going to be a different vision there from the filmmaker and the author. I mean, look at Fall of House of Usher. It is based on the works of Edgar Allan Poe, but it's a completely fresh story. It just utilizes the themes and the Easter eggs and the stories present in the text and then does its own thing with that. So, and then there are other adaptations that are very faithful. And so I think it really depends on a case by case basis. Like I didn't even thought about that before with, so one of his reasons not liking The Shining initially is like, yeah, when you're reading the book, he is a more like, normal functioning person, at the beginning. And then, but the movie is straight up Jack Nicholson Joker, throughout. And so I can see where that's, it makes for a good entertainment, but it is different from the message and the purpose that he was trying to convey with the book. So I think it's really, it really varies. I mean, when Rob Reiner made Stand By Me, Stephen King told him after that like, I want you to have a hand in like all my adaptations going forward, or at least for a while. And that's how he, why he did Misery. And then he was actually originally going to do Shawshank before Frank Darabont did it. But like, I think it really depends on the property. Generally there is generally like very faithful adaptations are the way to go, but there is a time and a place for different kind of interpretation that I still think stays true to the meaning of the text. I mean, look at Lord of the Rings changes things, but it still very much captures the essence of Tolkien and the mythology that he created there. It just changes some things to better adapt it into a film, but I don't think that's a bad thing. But I'm curious. I mean, I don't know. This is something we could go through so many adaptations and look at. Like, I mean, I have thoughts on. I read the book for Killers of the Flower Moon, and I just saw the film the other day, and I have thoughts there about like how it adapted, and there's things I would have done differently. But there are still really powerful elements of the film that to capture the essence of what the book was doing.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely agree. It's one of those things for me. It's one of those, a writer intended something at the very beginning. Like when I write something, like I am intending to tell you something, show you something along the way, that we're going to work together. You as the reader, me as the writer, we both have that mutual trust that I'm going to get you a story that hopefully satisfies you. And then when someone comes along and says, hey, I want you to change this. Well, a part of that is me being like, how dare you change anything I've ever done? Like I'm perfect in my own way and my story is perfect. Then there's also the critical side of me that says, no, there's this wrong. You could have written this better. And then if someone I did have a fight with my editor one time for my second book, Broken Veil, of whether there's a certain scene there where a villain my intention was for him to be hoisted by his own petard, to hand something that was actually going to save a protagonist's life by thinking he's going to like drench him in this water, not knowing it's actually holy water. And that would be one way to get him out there. But my editor, I can't remember exactly what we argued on. It's been so long ago, but he said, you're making him an idiot to do it this way. Work it this way to where he's still a fool, to give him the ultimate means of being defeated by his action here without making him like a complete and utter buffoon, So that's something I needed. And when it comes to adaptations of King's work, it's one of those things that Kubrick, obviously he has a vision and you're going to do it his way. You're going to retake the take like 600 times before he's satisfied. And he may use take 457. And King had a very different idea for The Shining, but he also did a mini series in the 90s, remaking The Shining. It was like a two-parter, which wasn't as well received, and it was a little more faithful. So really it depends on who's in charge.
Yeah.
And how you're working together. Like, go ahead.
Oh, I totally agree that there are going to be certain filmmakers that yeah, they have a specific vision. They're going to do it no matter what people say. In many ways, that makes for some great stories. Not always, but yeah, that's why I said it really depends on the project. And you look at Mike Flanagan, like I was on Sylvester, but really all of his TV projects, other than Midnight Mass, which is original, he really does just take kind of the idea. Because I have read some of the original Haunting of Hill House novel, and it's nothing like the show. He just sort of takes the gothic nature of that book and then does a completely different story. And I mean, he made a great series there. And so that's the thing. I think if he had done like a strict faithful adaptation set in the 1800s, I don't think it would have been as good. Like I liked what he did with the show. And so, yeah, you have to have that, give creators some freedom, but there is a difference between having a vision that works and is meant to tell a good story and then butchering a property in like as an example, like Neil Gaiman turned down so many Sandman adaptations before the show that came out last year is great, but before that, there studios were approaching him and wanted to make like this trilogy about Morpheus versus Lucifer, which is not at all what the comic is about, and would have been so just Hollywoodized and just really stupid. And he turned. I mean, there's famously a John Peters pitch that went to him that, of course, had a giant spider in it that battled Morpheus, and Neil Gaiman had to explain why it was garbage, and he would never allow that to happen. So there's a difference that where if it's a matter of, oh, we just want to change this completely in an effort for commercial value, I think that's a terrible way to go. But if it is a filmmaker with a specific vision and they want to do something that is different from the source material, not as an insult to the author, but just because they have a different idea and a different approach, and they're also trying to tell a very good, distinctive story, I think that is appropriate in cases.
Yeah, it's like the most recent adaptation of One Piece into live action was extremely well done because the original creator, Ichiro Oda, was there supervising the project, vetoing stuff he didn't like, while working with the directors and the writers, because you had to be very pragmatic in your adaptation here for like 8 or so episodes versus something that happens over the course of 100 plus chapters in a manga. And that's not easy to translate with a budget to live action. Now, it'd be different if it were remaking it in like a cartoon instead of like the original anime that we're making one over here. Like the budget doesn't matter as much. They can just a shot for shot as much as they want. But live action, that takes a lot more. It takes people working together to make compromises, because they're not one-to-one the same story, but there's enough there that they're tied together. It makes enough sense.
Well, it's like, I mean, go ahead. No, I was going to say, like, they're making a live action Last Airbender series, and like they released images the other day, and I know it's not going to be the same as the animated series, and there's no way you can cover all of that material for a live action series. But nonetheless, I'm looking forward to it, and I'm interested in seeing what kind of things they change, what remains the same. And, we've already suffered through the M. Night Shyamalan movie, so nothing can be worse than that. So I'm in the images. Oh gosh, yeah. But they released images of the Fire Nation characters, and I'm really excited to see some of those characters come to live action form. And so, I'm okay with, interpretations. I mean,
Yeah. It's one thing too with King's work. That was a recent, God help us all, the Dark Tower movie that came out in like 2017, I think.
Can I tell a quick story about that? Like,
go ahead.
Like, my friend and I were gonna go. I had already seen it, but that was the year that Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets came out, which I think is very underrated. Not a perfect movie, but underrated. I had seen it. Friend wanted to see it with me. We went to the theater, and it was a very like rundown theater as it was, and we went into that screening, and there was a huge slash on the screen. Like it smelled. It was just like we were like, we're not seeing this, and so we just like walked down to another theater there, and Dark Tower is playing. So we ended up seeing that. And I'm like, I almost wish I would rather see a movie with a slash across the screen than watch this.
I don't blame you one bit. It is a terrible adaptation of the original. Yeah. And what irks me too is, I think they paid him a little money to say this, is that they got Stephen King to say that the director hadn't forgotten the face of his father, which if you're into the Dark Tower series, that basically means like you're on your path. You know what's right. You know what you're supposed to be doing. And that is most definitely not the case. The director did not most definitely forgot the face of his father.
Yes, very.
But I have heard those rumors of Flanagan actually being involved with the potential TV series of doing the Dark Tower.
Yeah.
With Amazon, I think was the last I heard of that.
Yes.
I am super hyped about that one if that's coming through.
Yep. Yeah, like I've heard the rumors too, and I really hope. But yeah, we'll see.
But yeah, with that in mind, since this episode is going to be split, let me briefly go over for you, like to hype the audience that doesn't know anything about the Dark Tower series, what is it about. And I'm going to do the best I can because there's a lot to discuss.
Yeah.
If you want a series where over time you have a protagonist you don't start off liking as much, someone who is a complete jerk due to what's happened into his past, and you're captivated, like, how did it get here? What caused him to be so bitter? What caused him to sacrifice people along the way just for the single-minded goal of reaching the eponymous Dark Tower? Like, going in there, you want to see worlds that are broken because time and space are being destroyed all around you, because the beams that hold the worlds together are starting to be destroyed, are starting to be severed from where they're supposed to be, as pieces of reality start getting thinner and the boundaries between different realities are very shorter, and things cross over, eldritch things cross over. And then watch a guy chase after the man in black with his gun, trusty gun that you learn along the way was more than likely melted down from Excalibur and is a familial ancestral weapon, as he teams up with people, his quartet, his group of people that he trusts more than anything, as well as probably the most egregious self-insert of an author ever in any work of fiction ever that still somehow works. Guys, you got to check out the Dark Tower series. I'm going to talk about that more in like the more the cosmological side of things with TJ on the next part of the episode. Now, Kevin, you have anything else you want to bring up before we go to recommendations for you? And then I'll actually do the outro for everything with TJ.
I would just say, out of the stuff I've read in recent years, because he's gotten some really interesting stuff there as well, like more crime. And he actually did a series of pulp novels that, because the publisher had reached out to him to write an intro for something. He's like, let me write like 3 of them. And I read one of those, and that's a lot of fun, called Later. But one that I highly recommend of the last few years is The Institute. And that one, especially if you're a Stranger Things fan, which is cool because of course Stranger Things derives so much influence from King. This is a great follow-up to that because it's about a group of superpowered kids that are kept in this government facility. And it has sci-fi, crime, horror, kind of all embedded in there. And it's pretty epic. I read that a few years ago, really enjoyed it. So that's the thing about his work, is that it has there's such a large volume, and it spans multiple genres, and there's just something I really think for everyone. If you think Stephen King is just about monsters and stuff, yes, that's a common theme, but there is a lot more than that to his work.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, guys, yeah, check out King's stuff. Did you want that to be your recommendation? You want to try something else?
That'll be my main one. I also did want a quick other that I'm just reading right now. Totally separate, but this is a graphic novel from Boom Studios that I also think is relevant for Halloween horror season. It is called The Sacrifice of Darkness, written by Roxanne Gay and Tracy Lynn Oliver, with art by Rebecca Kirby. And it is an adaptation of a short story called We Are the Sacrifice of Darkness. I'm just reading the description here real quick off Boom's website, but follow one woman's powerful journey through this new landscape as she discovers love, family, and the true light in a world seemingly robbed of any. As she challenges notions of identity, guilt, and survival, she'll find that no matter the darkness, there remain sources of hope that can pierce the veil. And the whole, without light is literal. There's a incident at the beginning of the story where a scientist drives an air machine into the sun and it evaporates it. And so this new world is trapped in perpetual darkness. So I only started that earlier, but I'm really loving that because I've been going through some of the books I have through Humble Bundle, which is a really good resource if you want to get some really good indie comics that way. So that's one I want to recommend into the stuff I've already said. So Institute, and then of course Hall's House Watcher.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, we mentioned On Writing earlier. Excellent writing resource. But my actual recommendation will be one he wrote before that called Danse Macabre. And this is kind of a mix of things. Like there's some writing advice in there. There's his reflections on his own work and reflections on horror and film in general. And you get a lot of his insights. I think it came out in like the mid 80s, if I'm remembering correctly. So obviously anything written after that, there may have been some updated editions I haven't read, but it gets into his thought process at that time in his career, which in my opinion is kind of where he's at his height. Not to say that everything since then has been bad, but like that's where I really like King a lot, is like his earlier stuff. So check out Danse Macabre. So with that, we're going to take it over to TJ for the other side of the conversation. Is Ka a wheel? Does it sound like you've heard that question before? Well, it should, because you're in the second half of our discussion on Stephen King and his cosmology and his books and everything in there. And I'm joined this time by TJ Blackwell, my good friend, the one who I had to come to for the knowledge of everything Dark Tower, everything Stephen King, and the intricacies of his multiverses, because as a being himself who experienced his time a little different than the rest of us, TJ would know a little more than us. So TJ, how are you doing today?
Well,
excellent. So what have you been geeking out on recently, buddy?
Oh, recently I've been kind of...
If you say Valorant, I swear to God.
You want to see my VODs? That's what I stopped doing to record.
I should know better. So Valorant is your answer?
I don't want to be stagnant. I could say I'm getting back into Lord of the Rings in a much deeper way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I was just talking with a coworker last night, and he hadn't seen it before. So we're actually going to see if we can watch it while we're at work when things are kind of less hectic. So I'm looking forward to that, because it's been a while since I've watched the movies. And it's been a while since I've read the books, too.
Yeah, that's great.
But, well, in keeping with my last answer that I gave with Kevin, I'm still playing Spider-Man 2. I'm having the time of my life. I'm a little disappointed with the costume choices, really. But, like, if that's my biggest gripe against the game, other than, like, nerfing Peter a little bit, like, I'm A-okay with it. It's still an excellent game. I'm close to the end game. I'm having a good old fun time there. So, TJ, as you know, our topic of discussion today is Stephen King and his the cosmological wonders as part of our Origins cosmology series we've been doing this whole time. Like, how did you get into Stephen King's work?
It's kind of funny. Of course, I had seen like Christine and Cujo, and the ones that you just kind of see growing up. I'd seen those, and that doesn't really count because you're watching those. You don't get much out of the cosmology of the Stephen King universe. Getting into it, really, I read Dr. Sleep was the first King book that I actually read, which is, seems like an odd choice. And it is an odd choice. But I read Dr. Sleep, and then I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll read it because everybody was reading it. Oh, sure. And, The Shining and Dark Tower was great. I read that in like 11th grade, I think. Got into it in 11th grade. And then I was just kind of like, wow, there's a lot here. I've not read everything.
Yeah, we have a very similar story then, because I was reading it in the 11th grade too, as my introduction to Stephen King. And I won't go into details since I already talked about it with Kevin. But my first book was The Stand, and enjoyed that immensely, and just kept going from there.
Yeah, yeah. How do you feel about the Castle Rock books?
See, Castle Rock.
There's a lot of different, the stories that happen in Castle Rock.
It is Derry. Castle Rock, is that?
Castle Rock's the other one.
Okay.
Castle Rock is I'm
trying to remember the books that actually take place in Castle Rock. Is Insomnia there?
Cujo, Buick by the 8. Insomnia is not in Castle Rock.
Okay. Cujo definitely. That's a good one. Kevin and I talked to. He doesn't remember writing the book because of all the cocaine he was on at the time. But yeah, solid stuff. Like early King is probably my favorite King.
Yeah. Interesting, because early King was like the non-cosmological King.
Pretty much, yeah. Like Dark Tower is its own thing away from everything else. I do still really enjoy that, but like I enjoy like, Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Stand, The Shining, all that stuff a bit more than his other stuff. And like I told Kevin, like I'm way behind on his stuff. I think the last most recent book I read of his was Revival. So there's that.
Oh yeah. Well,
so
that's a lot.
Yeah. Do you yourself have a favorite book? And if so, how does it tie in, if it does, to his larger cosmological mythos?
Honestly, I think my favorite book of Stephen King's might be The Gunslinger.
Okay.
It might be it. I can't really decide. And
they're both solid choices.
Yeah, they're both really involved in the cosmology. One is a little less in your face about it, but yeah.
Yeah, my answer was The Stand, and I actually forgot to go into answering that part, so I'll do it here. Is that for The Stand, obviously we have Randall Flagg appearing pretty much for the first time. There are a couple RF figures you'll see across different King books and stuff like that could possibly be tied back to him. I love that part because Randall Flagg is one of my favorite villains in literature, and obviously you see him later on being the different aspects. Is he the Man in Black? Is he working with the Crimson King? Does he have his own initiative? How are things going there? Love all that part. So anything else you want to add there before we get into the nitty gritty?
Well, have you seen the idea that Randall Flagg is every King antagonist, or the Man in Black is every King? Yeah.
I don't think it's true, but I like when people speculate about stuff like that.
Yeah, I appreciate the effort because, like, obviously the Man in Black is not Pennywise.
Yes. Two wholly different people.
Yeah.
Or entities. All right. Well, let's get into it. Like, as far as the cosmological side of things, King, as Kevin and I noted before, he doesn't always plan things out. And as time went on, he did after his car crash incident where he was run over, realized, I haven't finished my Dark Tower series. People are really looking forward to this. This is something I want to get done, just in case anything happens to me. So he buckled down, started writing more. We got the rest of that series going there. And actually in the Song of Susanna, which is the 6th book, we first hear of the entity known as Gan or Gan. Now, this kind of serves as the actual Almighty God figure of the series, but he's not alone. And I actually learned this as I was doing my research because I've never once heard of her before. He has an equal and opposite mother god in Bessa, who appears in the Dark Tower comics as being mentioned there, which actually I've never read those. Marvel did those back, I want to say around the time I was leaving high school. So that's something I do need to get into, but she kind of serves as like not necessarily a trickster figure. She's more into like gambling and stuff like that, if I remember correctly. So how do you feel about those two characters? Like, obviously we're given very brief glimpses into it. They don't actually physically appear, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. They're not like, they're said to be, all powerful, like deific beings, and they're just not very interactive.
Yeah.
And like people pray to Bessa and like ask Bessa for, help and things. But it's, I don't know. It feels like one of those things King kind of tacked on there to me.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's weight there because people, follow the will of Gan and they do worship them. But there are other things, I feel like other entities in King's universe are more deserving or earn it more.
Yeah, I can definitely see that because when we look at Gan, it's kind of like one of those things written after the fact, obviously. Mm-hmm. And like there is the white versus the red being like the Crimson King trying to break everything down and mold it into his own image. Then we have the white, which serves the purpose of, keeping things not as they are, but like to that extent of not being destroyed.
Yeah.
So, and actually, if I remember correctly, one of the kind of the little retcons he makes along the way is that Bessa is actually represented physically in the form of the rose that is protected within the towers. Like, it's been a while since I've reread the Dark Tower series, but I'm fairly certain he doesn't mention her by name there, because I'm fairly certain the first time that her name is mentioned is in a supplemental like Marvel Dark Tower comic book.
Yeah. She is the Rose in universe.
Yeah,
it's like, and then anytime somebody mentions the Rose in a King novel, now you're supposed to know, like, oh, okay,
that's her.
That's Bessa.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you're aware of this. I think I actually talked about this in our Cold episode we did for a whole church. I met in college a group of people known as the, oh goodness gracious, what is their name? The World Mission Society Church of God or something like that. They're a Korean cult, and they believe in both a father God and the mother God. Now, have you ever encountered anyone like that before in your life?
I have not.
Okay,
That's very interesting.
They are. It was actually one of those bits of serendipity early in my, walk. It's like learning, okay, why do they believe what I believe? Excuse me, why do they believe what they believe? Why do I believe what I believe? And that there is a singular Father, 3 in 1. But then they look at Scripture and they'll point out and say, "Oh, this verse in Isaiah says God is acting like a mother, so therefore there must be a mother God too." It's like, and then you look at the original Hebrew for Genesis and see bara, which is he created. It's a very masculine action performed there. So I didn't know if you'd encountered them before. I know they're getting a lot more prevalent. I actually was just looking at the news about them the other day, and people are warning that, hey, like, watch out for them. They attack you pretty much 2-on-2, not like actually physically, but like cornering you and trying to get you alone, bring you back to the mothership, as it were, so that they can proselytize to you, evangelize to you. So listeners, if you do encounter them, now you know what they're about. So look out. But on to the actual Stephen. Yeah, go ahead.
I wish that would happen to me. That's so interesting.
Yeah, they were wild people. But getting back to Stephen King, we kind of next get to some of the earliest of the cosmology in his series in the book of It, where we see that Pennywise is not just some mystical figure, not just some emotion eater that just preys on children. It's actually a being that existed essentially before creation to an extent, at least in the world of It, which is not the Keystone Earth in Stephen King's. Keystone Earth is actually like our world where Stephen King exists in. This is kind of like one of the main worlds where a lot of his stuff happens in, is the world of It. And Maturin is the turtle that essentially vomited up the earth after a bad digestive period or something like that, and created our universe. And It was very offended by that fact, crash landed on Earth, and has been preying on humans ever since. So how do you feel, TJ, about the backstory of Earth, in its version of that, at least, of only being created due to a divine figure, like vomiting it out?
I don't know. That's one of those things where I'm kind of like, what are you going to do about it? If that's the way it is, then so be it. Then, who's to say that's not how God created the world? You don't know.
Well, if he chose to do that way, he definitely didn't put it in the book.
No,
but yeah, just to maintain his dignity. Yeah, say we can skirt over that fact. No, it's kind of like finding out that the Earth is actually on top of a bunch of elephants who are on top of a turtle. Like if that was actually real or something like that. Like I think King's just being playful here. I don't think he was trying to make a religious statement with this. But how do we feel about those two entities as well, Maturin and It, or Pennywise itself? Yeah.
So I think, so it's an interesting dualism, and it's not an exact dualism like some people think we have, or like the Jedi and the Sith, allegedly. And I don't know. I like what he's doing. These things that are clearly different. Are the turtles part of Maturin as well? I mean, the elephants. I thought that was Discworld.
No, well, that's the Discworld one is based off of like an older concept that people had. That he used it more as like a tongue-in-cheek way of that's how the world works.
Okay, cool. But as forces, I do like it a lot. Maturin is just kind of chilling, doing his thing. It's kind of like Atlas, and while Pennywise, it just gets to do whatever he wants, and Maturin, the one who clearly could stop him, can't. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah, there's a unique dualism there, as you put it. It's like in a sense that goes against like our idea. Like if you look outside of Christianity, you go, well, God and Satan, obviously they're equal forces. No, we actually look in Scripture. There's clearly one above the other, and it ain't Satan. But in this, these two feel like they're very closely tied together. A very kind of yin yang Shintoism, kind of Taoism kind of look at the world of there being these equal but opposite forces. And Monturin himself is acting against Pennywise in his own way, but it doesn't look like it unless you end up in the ritual of Chud, as Bill does as part of the story early on. Well, actually, later on. And it's interesting to see the way the two work against each other. Like Pennywise is very obvious what its influence is in the world. How do you feel about that?
No, I mean, I feel like that's real. That's, darkness does not move quietly.
Yeah, excellent point. I mean, it's kind of very obvious when there's a darker presence or figure working against people in this world. Like it's kind of obvious when, a tsunami comes or a hurricane or an earthquake or someone obviously using their, money for evil, or a pastor saying inflammatory speeches at a church rather than anything that came from the actual Gospels. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah. It's subtler to see the good in the world because we live in such a fallen world. It's harder to see it.
Yeah, and it speaks to their roles in the story, because Maturin's role is, not to take the spotlight. And this is not, in universe. This is kind of just as literature. You don't want your big, powerful God figure to just be there and be like, oh, everything's fine. Don't worry about it. So he kind of has to take the back seat in terms of what he's doing. And then your antagonistic force is the conflict, is what needs to be read about. So they're kind of a victim of circumstance, of, being in a book. But
well, that's a good point, too, is that whole Deus Ex Machina idea of like we have this, more heavenly-esque figure intervene. Like, what is the point where that becomes, well, then what's the point of having our characters do anything? They're not struggling. It's not an effort for them to get things done. They're just being handed something. So, yeah, I completely agree. Like, there's got to be a way you can play and have an upper level figure like a Maturin, like a Gon, like God himself, without like, well, he'll solve everything. Because, yeah, sure, God can choose to intervene if he wants to, but that does not an interesting story make.
Nope. Divine love is uncontrolling. Can't stop us from being us. That's free will.
Okay. Do you have anything else you want to add for the two of them?
I think concept-wise, Pennywise is probably like the coolest entity I think he's the Crimson King. I think they are the same. So the Crimson King is really like, wow, that's awesome, terrifying, awesome in the classical sense.
Fascinating. Yeah, I have heard that before, that people do believe they're one and the same.
I think so.
Yeah, I don't think I stand on that, but I can definitely see where the argument would come from.
Yeah. It comes from like the deadlights. The Crimson King uses the deadlights to move between levels of the tower.
That makes enough sense. All right. So as this multiverse is being created, what we find along the way in Roland's journey, for those of you who do not know, Roland is the main character of the Dark Tower series. He's a gunslinger. His job is basically to track down the Man in Black, find where the Crimson King is, and stop him from destroying reality as we know it. And reality is being held together by these kind of metaphysical like tethers that are holding everything in place, called the beams. And at this point in the story, I believe at least 2 of the 6 have been destroyed, if I remember correctly, by the Crimson King's forces. And as well as we learn, the Rose, we also found out earlier, also Bessa in the physical form, is there as a way of maintaining that balance, that if the Rose is destroyed, reality as we know it will be gone. Then it leads us to our titular Dark Tower, where everything is tied together, where the Crimson King is trying to get inside of and take control of it. So how do you feel about the world building done here, with these all being used as keystones that keep reality tethered together?
Yeah, so I like it, and I don't just like it because it is like convoluted in a way that our own universe is tied together in a way that you couldn't possibly understand. Just being a human without tools, faith, like science to describe it to you. In that, if you aren't able to go into Todash space and move between the dimensions of Stephen King's cosmology, how could you fathom what's happening here unless you're just at the Dark Tower? So I like that it feels kind of mystic.
Okay. Yeah, we should probably explain some terms here. Todash is kind of the concept of like the in-between of realities. Most of the time, if you go into the Todash, you're not going to make your way out of it unless you're using very specific means to travel between different realities. We didn't even explain who the Crimson King was. He is basically our antagonist for the series that we don't see until the very end of the Dark Tower, where, spoilers along the way, he has degraded over time mentally, is now undead, and basically has lost his mind to the point where he's just throwing, he's throwing the snitches at people, or the sneeches as they call it, for copyright purposes.
Yeah.
And he is drawn out of existence by good old Patrick from Insomnia, which is the whole point of that book, because Roland's guns don't affect him anymore at this point in his life. So his job is he wants to unmake reality in his own image by taking down the beams that support reality, finding the rose, using it for his own purposes, and then leading from the Dark Tower itself, learning how can he reshape reality. But to the question I posed, I love it as a concept for like, okay, how do we raise the stakes? Like, we have a big bad here. They want to remake reality. Well, how do they do that? Well, because reality works this way. We have these beams that if you have them together, it ties this reality to this reality over here, which ties it to this reality over here. But if one of those beams is broken, like it does to Gilead, which is Roland's world, it becomes lost, essentially. It's still there, but it's dying. And it has the potential to like be wiped from existence itself. And that's such a fun way to play with it. It raises the stakes. We've got to stop these beings from being destroyed. How do we do that?
If you map out Stephen King's books and kind of do it in like I don't remember the right word, but a pie chart, but not a pie chart, a big circular map. And you put the Dark Tower in the middle, then you can start drawing the beams out to the other worlds that Stephen King writes in. And it centered on the Dark Tower. It becomes the Dark Tower and his universe mapped out really well. I think that's awesome.
Oh, yes. And like from a writing standpoint too, like I talked about this with Kevin, I love a connected universe, especially within your own writing itself, not relying on anyone else. And King does that masterfully. In like, there will be even like one word will be used and go, oh, well, that ties into the talisman, or that's actually why, Pet Cemetery exists, or what have you. And that's just so much fun. It's very rewarding as a reader to, if I'm paying attention, I'm going to notice those threads and go, man, there's so much more in here because the author cares that much about everything else that he's written that he ties them together like that.
Yeah. And it's amazing that it is done so well, because he definitely didn't have a plan for it at the start. This isn't One Piece, which also, I hate to be the guy, but Oda didn't plan all of it from the start. He just planned most of it.
But I mean, for someone who didn't plan all of that, he's doing extremely well.
Yeah, they both are. I think if they like got together and talked about their writing, I think a lot of good would come of it.
Actually, it's funny enough, we did mention One Piece last time, as we were talking like the differences between the Shining book and the Shining film, and like, how do you feel about how like as a pragmatic adaptation of One Piece it is handled compared to the manga it's adapting?
Pragmatically, great. Yes. It made changes it needed to make.
Yeah, I argued much the same. So there we go. I was expecting a short answer for that because I know TJ well enough. Do you have anything else you want to add about the beams, the rose, the Dark Tower?
Did we talk about Insomnia?
Briefly. But do you want to go more in depth?
Not really. But that's where we see the Crimson King for the first time. As Robert something? His mom. Crimson King takes the form of his mom before revealing himself.
Yeah. And that's where he's trying to kill Patrick because he knows there's a prophecy that Patrick will be able to kill the Crimson King, as we do see in the Dark Tower, where Patrick's ability is to like draw stuff and either, if I remember correctly, give them life or take it away. It's kind of a bit of a reality warper himself. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. And then in Insomnia, the Crimson King tells Ralph Roberts,
okay,
I can be anything I want. You may not know it, but shape changing is a time-honored tradition in Derry.
That's true. It's been so long since I've read Insomnia. Oh, it's so good.
So, but I think he might be Pennywise.
All right, that's further proof live on the podcast. I like it, because one of the things we find that is Patrick is one of many people who have telekinetic or reality warping capabilities that are desired by the Crimson King for uses in his kind of slave forces known as the Breakers, whose job it is to concentrate their will and power onto the beams to break them apart. And that's such a cool concept too, because even like we get to short stories like the Low Men in Yellow Coats or something like that, like even a low level telekinetic telepath, I can't remember exactly which one he is in a story, is enough of a use to be thrown against the beam itself to try and break it down, that the Crimson King will send his people after him.
No.
Oh, yeah. So with that said, we have to move on to Ka. Now, Ka is one of those things that's kind of taken from portions of Egyptian mythology. It's that sense of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Of there being a destiny or fate to the world and to people. And it's not exactly like, doesn't have to be a plan for reality, but like it works itself as like a guide to what could be a plan. It's a very difficult thing to talk about because it can also mean like life force and stuff like that. And Ka is actually used several times in reference to groups, like our quartet is our main characters working together. Roland, Susanna, Eddie, Jake,
mm-hmm.
and Oi. Good old Oi. And it's used in that sense of like I said earlier, destiny or fate. So, TJ, how do you feel on what do you think of the idea of all things being predetermined by fate or destiny?
Well, I am not a Calvinist. Final answer. No, I don't hate it. It's kind of like I'm having trouble remembering what it's called. Quantum immortality. It's like if someone dies and they weren't supposed to die yet, they get shunted to a new universe where everything's the same, but they didn't die. One of those things, like the universe corrects itself if it has to. And I like that idea. So I appreciate that Ka, and it's not super fleshed out, but I appreciate its presence. And at first I thought it was kind of like karma, not in like the modern sense where it's like, oh, if you do bad things happen. But it's really not. It's kind of its own thing. And it's just the universe has a will and tries to exert it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm weird, and I'm a predestination and free will kind of person. However, the metaphysics of that work when it comes to, salvation and all that, I don't know. I don't pretend to know. It's just, to me, it makes sense that God, being who he is, being all powerful, being all loving, desires us to come to him. But at that same time, people are going to say no. They have the right to say no because they are fallen. And yet God is still working things towards the good of those who love him. He's crafting history out as things go on, knowing how people are going to react. And if we look at something like Pharaoh in Exodus, like it doesn't start off with, a God hardened Pharaoh's heart. It starts with Pharaoh hardened Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh hardened Pharaoh's heart. Then it goes to God hardened Pharaoh's heart to like confirm the choices that Pharaoh had already made that were working alongside God's own plan to get Israel out of Egypt. So that's why I take it. I know there are other people that have vastly different opinions on predestination and free will. Now, when it comes to like Ka, fate, or destiny, I believe in destiny to an extent, in that it's going to happen, regardless of what people do or because of what people do. It's going to happen, but it's because of those free choices, that free will made along the way is why it happens. And I don't know exactly what you would call that point of view, other than heretical in some people's minds, but that's where I land.
Yeah, I've always felt like very, come what may, I it's my life, and that's the way it was going to happen no matter what I did. So that allows me to live with no to few regrets. I don't want to say no regrets, but
yeah.
And if you embody that, I think it allows you to live kind of stress-free. Because if there's something stressing you out and you can do something about it, then you do something about it and you don't worry about it. And if there's something stressing you out that you can't do anything about, then why are you worrying about it? You can't do anything about it.
Yeah. It's one of those things that at a certain point you're going to have to come to terms with, like, what do I think on this? And it feels like in the Dark Tower series itself, like Ka is a wheel. Ka is constantly changing. We learn along the way. This is not the first time Roland has been on this journey, and it's not going to be the last either. If you go past the chapter, Stephen King says, hey, if you just want a perfect ending, here you go. But then he does this very Stephen King thing of, like, there's more. And you read, and this time around, he has the horn of Eld.
Yeah.
Really? With him.
I was reading it earlier.
Yeah. Something that will help him along his journey, which means that things have changed on this loop rather than what happened before. So it doesn't seem that things are predetermined to bring a point to where they're going to be done differently the next. Okay, they're going to be done differently the next time around. The tower gives Roland the chance to be better. It sounds like his friends in this new reality have lasted a lot longer than it did in the old one. He hasn't lost some of the things along the way. So maybe he's a more positive thinker this time around. Who knows? So that's where it kind of lands there. Anything else you want to add for Ka?
Yeah. I don't know. At some point, it seems kind of like it's undead unluck, you know?
Okay.
It's like, we're going to try that again. Let's try again.
Are you caught up?
I'm one behind.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. I definitely feel like that's a reference to a manga if anyone doesn't know that. It's not my favorite in the world, but it's good enough. It had a rough introduction. But here we get to one of the minions of the Crimson King. We mentioned him earlier, Randall Flagg, the Dark Man, one of my favorite villains in fiction. And what is his goal? Well, it kind of depends on where he's at and how much of a rational mind he has. Because he's all over the place. We see him even in what's the fantasy book? The Eyes of the Dragon. He's working as an evil advisor, a very Jafar kind of figure before Aladdin came out, and just whispering in the king's ear and stuff like that. We also see him as the Man in Black, Walter O'Dim. Or are they the same character? Are they different characters? It's kind of hard to tell at times as time goes on. But like obviously, my introduction to him was in The Stand, where you see him like leading in a very satanic way the forces of the world to survive this plague, to mold the earth in his image, to be worshipped as God, a very beast figure in that sense. So my question to you, TJ, is Randall Flagg King's best villain?
Yes.
Okay. More in depth. Let me hear.
Well, so actually, I think King's best villain is the army in the mist. Because the army somehow found out a way to open a gate to Todash space and just let all the monstrosities in.
Okay.
Just didn't resolve it.
Are you more of a short story or a movie guy?
I love the movie.
Absolutely, yeah. Kevin and I talked about that too. King said he prefers that ending too. Like it gives finality to something instead of the ambiguity of, well, we could keep going or not. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, how about Flagg?
So I like Flagg a lot. I really do. I like the theory that he is all of the antagonists, but there's not really an antagonist that King gets to write about as much as Flagg. Uh-huh. That helps a lot with fleshing him out and making him seem like a real villain.
Yeah. Yeah. As opposed to someone like Pennywise, who is this irredeemable force of nature that exists beyond what we would recognize as time, that just goes prays after children. It's like kind of the perfect villain in a way. Like I talked with Kevin about him kind of being like the Joker. Like you don't need to know too much. You just know like perfect villain. They're going to do evil things. And Flagg too, in that extent, has moments of humanity in him as he's dealing with people. Like in The Stand, you do see him like take on a wife and in some ways be tender, but also in a very manipulative sense. He's all over the place there. And I love to see this master manipulator, like, number one, get hoisted by his own petard time and time again by things that he thinks are beneath him. But then too, like seeing how he goes to people and preys on their thoughts, preys on their feelings to go, oh, well, just join my side. I'll help you out. I'll be your number one fan. Like, we'll get things done here. Just work with me. And he's perfect for that.
Yeah. He's a good, like, corrupted Pentecostal pastor.
I see it. And into like, even his death kind of feels a little anticlimactic to me. I've thought about it since I first originally read it, where he's killed by Mordred, who's like the half spawn of Roland and Susanna and all this mess with the incubus and succubus. Yeah, but I do enjoy it ultimately because once again, he is defeated by something he thought beneath him.
Yeah, you'd figured he'd learn his lesson, but I think he reflects the Crimson King in that way a lot, because the Crimson King for sure could have collapsed, the universe if he was more willing to do more work by himself.
Yeah,
when he was powerful.
And that's the thing about him too is we'll go ahead and transition to the Crimson King. We talked about him a little bit earlier, but he could have done all that. Now, he himself is believed to be the illegitimate child of Arthur Eld, who is essentially our King Arthur, from which Roland's line is descended, from where he gets melted down guns that were once Excalibur. So there's that duality there. It's like he is essentially family to Roland, several generations removed. But he could have done all these things as he's seeking out knowledge, trying to find a way to where he can become the center of the tower, like change things to where he is God in this world. But he relies on other people.
Yeah.
How do you feel about how that's handled?
I think it's good. It's like I said, it reminds me of Flag, and it shows that he is not. A lot of villains fall into that trap where they think they're too powerful to fail. So I appreciate it when they don't fall for that. But this is the one case where it's like, stop sending breakers.
Like, get out there yourself, buddy.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to take that risk.
Well, we did briefly talk about it earlier as well. Like when Roland finally confronts him at the end of the Dark Tower, he's not who we're expecting. Mm-mm. We're expecting some, Palpatine kind of figure who's still got his mind and wits about him. But instead, he's broken down because of the degradation of the evil that he's done, the fact that he's undead right now. And he's babbling incoherently and is taken out by people who really shouldn't be able to do that if he were at his full extent of his power. But because he's not, he does end up dying. So how did you feel about the actual reveal of who he was and how he operates?
Yeah, I do like that because we know he wasn't weak before. Mm-hmm. He destroys the remnants of Roland's realm, Gilead, mm-hmm. and commits suicide. The Crimson King does, doing it, and that's what makes him weak. That's what puts him in this state. It's odd. I feel like it's not ideal. I would have liked something a little more climactic, but Stephen King is great at a lot of things, and I don't think endings are one of them.
There's a common complaint sent his way. I'm not always as harsh as other people are, but I definitely get why people would be upset with certain things that he does. So I just feel I kind of wrapped up a little too neatly along the way. And that's if you read the original ending versus what happens in that chapter. He says, hey, totally don't read this.
Right.
Where we're given another chance. So maybe the Crimson King is different in that time. Who knows? Do you have anything else you want to say about him?
I just feel like he gets so much build up, and he is the antagonist, and we're supposed to get this big epic duel between our nice quartet and the Crimson King. I don't know, man. It's fine. I'll probably reread it.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'm going to reread later on. I get a lot from rereading stories like this, especially when you start noticing everything that ties together. I was talking with Kevin too about how much I love Father Callahan's journey. Not exactly where he ends up theologically, but where he ends up as a character versus how he started in Salem's Lot, and then becoming a member of the quartet and finding new purpose in his life, beyond just fighting vampires. Oh, it's excellent there. So the Dark Tower series, if you guys haven't read it, if you haven't read anything by Stephen King, where would you say would be a good place for people to start if they want to start off small?
Small, huh?
Yeah.
The Gunslinger.
Okay. So if they wanted specifically to get into the Dark Tower, you just start with the first book.
Yeah, start with the first book in the Dark Tower. And from there, you can branch out into the rest of the cosmology because it is not strictly necessary to understand it to enjoy the books. Okay. And I think you'll get the most jumping off points from the Gunslinger.
All right. Me, myself, I will pick, might as well just start at the beginning. Go to Carrie. He's a young author. He's learning how to get things done, but Carrie's still a very solid book to this day. And you start seeing where King begins versus where he ends up along the way. Like, can't go wrong with that. If you want to go something spookier that's shorter, go to Salem's Lot or The Shining. If you've already seen the movie, you want to see how it was done differently, I'd recommend reading the book there. Like, if you just want to start in King, just go to the very beginning. Go to Carrie.
Yeah. Or like The Mist. I don't know. You can really start mostly anywhere. I don't recommend starting with Dr. Sleep.
Yeah. As much as I love The Stand, and I'm glad it was my introduction, not everyone's prepared to read the unabridged 1,000+ pages to get into Stephen King. And I don't blame you for that. Not everyone's built that way. I am, because I was captivated the moment I started reading it. I love convoluted stuff like that. But not everyone has to be wired my way, and the world is better off that way. So any final thoughts on the cosmology before we head on into our wrap-up?
I think as really the first person to do this kind of thing and make this big, expansive multiverse in which he can play around, he did amazing. I do think it's been done better since. But, this is the one. This is the first one. And it deserves its respect, and it deserves your time because it's good.
And it's one of the other things Kevin and I talked about, too, is we're really hoping that Mike Flanagan actually gets to do his Amazon Dark Tower book-by-book series that doesn't do movies, but just like gives the time needed to flesh everything out. I'm hoping for that more than anything.
Yeah, that would be great.
All right. So, TJ, do you have any recommendations to give the audience?
Recommendations. I'm trying to look at my bookshelf, see what I just picked up recently. Play Valorant.
I despise you so much. I love you. Okay, well, that's TJ's recommendation. Mine is an odd one in that I recently have caught up to all the podcasts that I listen to. So I decided to re-listen to the start of SG. And I am really enjoying the journey to see where it started from. And I know it's such a dark and terrible period of time where I'm not around to be the voice of reason, but you got to be patient. There's plenty of good stuff there. So please just re-listen to the old episodes. There's a lot of quality discussions had there at the very beginning. So listeners, thank you for what you do here. We're very appreciative of you listening. And for those of you who want to head over to Patreon and Captivate to just help us to keep the lights on, get things going and flowing, we will be in, I think, yes, this episode will release in time. We'll be at the Comic-Con in North Carolina. Which one is that again, TJ? Will you be there for that?
I will.
Okay, it's November 4th, right?
November 4th.
Okay. What city is it in?
Raleigh.
Okay. At Raleigh Comic-Con there, having a panel that I know at least will TJ, I think Kevin and Joshua will be there too.
Who knows?
I have to look that up.
I know Will.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's at 1 p.m. that day. If it's a multi-day week, who knows? I don't know because I won't be there, unfortunately, because I'm still at school up here. But head out that way and support us there. We'd love to have you listen to a live podcast recording that we're doing there. So please, listeners, just give you a chance. Just leave a 5-star review in your podcasting platform of choice. Head to our YouTube or Discord. We have a lot of quality stuff there we're talking about too. But remember, we're all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.
This was an Anazao Ministries podcast. If you enjoyed this show and would like to learn more about our network, be sure to check out the Anazao Ministries podcast network.